Hello. Thank you, Dr. Ford, and thank you. I'm truly honored to be part of this wonderful speaker series. You know, I've lived in a lot of cities throughout this country, and I gotta tell you, I've never come across anything like this where you have, perhaps present company excluded, interesting people coming through who talk about a whole range of, this is just fabulous. I feel like I'm in a university town with all sorts of stimulating conversations. So this is a wonderful thing IHMC and Dr. Ken Ford have put on. So thank you, thank you. But you're here to talk about wheat, I'm told. So I call this wheatlessness. I hope that'll make sense to you at the end of this talk, because we paint this as eliminating this thing in our diet called wheat, but it's more than that. I hope I can convince you of that by the end of this hour or so of talking. This is about something much different than what you thought it was if you haven't heard this conversation before. And so I know who I'm talking to. How many people have read the book? Okay, great. So a lot have not. So forgive me, those of you familiar with this conversation and deeply into it. I'm going to talk as if then you are not familiar with this message. Okay, so let's start from scratch. So I'm going to tell you that you've been unwittingly led down this path of having your appetite stimulated by nice people in big food and the food industry, and I'll show you why that is. And we've had our behavior manipulated. Now, perhaps we might say it's just blundering and not intentional manipulation, but regardless of the motivation, we've had our behavior, our eating habits, our nutrition manipulated, okay? And so I will tell you that once you come to understand this, you regain control over weight, over health, over the way you feel. So this is about exposing the issues for what they really are. So let's start with a nice testimonial. This is a guy who works in radio, so you'll see people who you are familiar to you from TV and Hollywood and so on. But he's a radio guy who's actually from an area where I grew up in New Jersey. But he's got a great story to tell. I'll give you a good introduction to this whole notion.
My whole life, I've probably been in physically good condition, maybe a year and a half total. Otherwise, I've pretty much struggled with weight my entire life. My doctor had kept telling me, you got to go for a stress test, you got to go for a stress test, just to make sure everything's okay. So finally, I made the appointment. The stress test came back very negative. The cardiologist sat down and said to me, you are in danger. If you weren't feeling fine right now, I'd probably send you to the hospital right now. To me, that was a wake-up call, because I walked out of there with a prescription for blood pressure medication. After discovering wheat belly and following really to the letter, I lost 30 pounds in 4 months. Then I started noticing my blood pressure was coming down. I was pre-diabetic. My blood sugar was normalizing. I wasn't feeling any joint pain. I could move around much more easily. And I felt really, really good. About a month or two into it, it got really easy. I didn't have to think about, oh, well, I better not eat wheat this time, because I wasn't hungry for it. I wasn't craving it. You know, those cravings were gone. And I said, well, just don't eat anything with wheat in it. Just start with that. And just do it for 2 weeks. Then after 2 weeks, do it for another 2 weeks. And see how you feel. You probably start feeling some kind of benefit, really, literally within the first week, for most people. I mean, it's that dramatic. And I can't recommend it highly enough, because it will really change the trajectory of your health and the trajectory of your life. I couldn't ask for any better type of way to be healthy. My name is Rick. I'm 46 years old. I live in New Jersey. I have a wife and 2 lovely daughters. And I'm on wheat belly.
Did you catch that? He lost his cravings. Yeah, he lost 30 pounds. But that's not what this is really about. It's about removing this thing that has affected health at so many levels. So you can lose weight. We can paint this as a weight loss program, but it's not really that. So this whole conversation got started with a book I wrote because I saw what happened in my cardiac practice. I wanted to give people a better tool for gaining control over cardiovascular risk. That's what I was doing. And it's well known that if you have coronary disease, and you have risk for heart attack, sudden cardiac death, bypass surgery, 3 stents, etc., you cannot control that risk as long as you have diabetes or prediabetes or have a high blood sugar. Can't, right? So I wanted a better way to give people control over this very, very scary process. You must have control over blood sugar. Blood sugar must be normal, period. So, simple logic. Take out the food that has among the highest of all glycemic indexes, wheat, okay? We do that, and we see all the stuff involved. So it starts with this book I wrote, and the thing explodes. It's not because of my incredible good looks, charisma, or persuasive talk. It's the social media, it's the conversations, it's the stories, it's the successes that this whole thing generated. So I'm sitting on the sidelines watching this happen while people are telling each other, I lost 93 pounds. My rheumatoid arthritis went away. So that's what we're dealing with, is we've exposed this thing and we're watching lives transformed now after 2 years since this thing came out on a scale I never foresaw. So we have people like this. There's a girl I brought onto the Oz show because she told me her story. Her dad just passed of complications of multiple amputations from diabetes. And then she was diagnosed with diabetes. And so that was her wake-up call. And so she followed this nutritional approach, eliminating all the wheat. Now she combined it with exercise, but a year later, she lost 150 pounds. 150 pounds, and this was on the eve of running her first half marathon, okay? And her joint pain went away, and her breathlessness that kept her from walking more than a block at a time went away, now running a half marathon. So yeah, it's about weight loss, yeah. But it's also about this change, this transformation in health that occurs when you remove this thing that never belonged in your diet in the first place. So all these stories just come pouring out. This is Clinton. He's lost 67 pounds in 15 months. No more hypertension, joint pain went away. This is Dawn, down 75 pounds. Her high blood pressure went away. She's no longer pre-diabetic. She's off antidepressants, size 16 down to a size 2. This is Margie, down 100 pounds in 1 year. She's kept it off for an entire year additionally, and she feels wonderful. Michael, he started at 300 pounds, low back pain, told he'd never run again. He lost 81 pounds in 90 days. He's running races. It's about to run his first marathon. This is Sarah. Hives, rashes went away. Her gastrointestinal distress went away. She's down 70 pounds in 7 months. Her sister lost 40 pounds and her lupus went away. This is Gary. His seborrhea and his psoriasis disappeared. The foot pain, moodiness, and IBS went away. He's down 60 pounds in 5 months. John, diabetic, on insulin and a page-long list of medications. Obese his entire life. He's down 113 pounds in 1 year. He's no longer diabetic, no longer takes any medication. Steph, no longer hypertensive. Blood sugar's normal. Foot pain's gone, down 70 pounds in 1 year. Melissa, no more binging, no more cravings for food, no more IBS. Skin cleared up. She's down 43 pounds. Isn't that something? Chris, size 20 down to size 8, off 9 prescriptions for acid reflux and chronic pain, down 85 pounds. Rachel, hospitalized before and treated for depression. And off wheat, depression lifted, skin improved, energy improved. She's down 90 pounds in 7 months. These are the kinds of stories that are driving this conversation. It's not me. It's what's happening to people when they do this thing that is completely the opposite of conventional advice. Well, this doesn't go unnoticed. The wheat lobby says, hey, what are those people talking about? So we get this sort of pushback. In the United States, a growing number of Americans have been duped duped, including celebrities like singer Lady Gaga. So Lady Gaga's duped, how do you like that? And Fox News host Bill O'Reilly into believing recent claims that wheat not only is no longer necessary for strong, healthy bodies, but it's also nefariously been turned into a chronic poison. Okay, they call out the scientists. They call out Dr. Glenn Gesser. There's a lingering perception that carbs are somehow bad, grains in particular. Much of that is based on conjecture. It's nonsense. It claims that wheat's the cause of all of our problems, that stimulates appetite, but that's just not true. And then another scientist, chair of the National Wheat Improvement Committee, he reported that modern wheat breeding has not changed protein composition. So according to our experts, this is nonsense. There have been no changes in wheat. Wheat's the same. It's been the same all along. How do we interpret data like this then? This is a study, a relatively recent study. What this reports are the changes introduced into the genetic code of wheat. In this case, a change that has caused a quadrupling of celiac disease. This is not about celiac disease, but celiac disease is kind of the canary in the coal mine. It tells us something has changed. If there's been a fourfold increase in celiac disease, well, what has changed? Well, we know that the genetic code of wheat has changed. A recent report, this is a news report from Cold Spring Harbor Lab in New York, one of the world's most famous genetics laboratories. This and related research reveals that the bread wheat genome, genetic code, has undergone rapid and significant change. Now, wait a minute here. So we hear from the wheat lobby that there are no changes. Wheat's been the same, unchanged. Well, there's no such plant, by the way, that has not undergone change at the hands of genetics research and agriculturalists. So it would be the only exception that has not, so of course it's changed. And we have hundreds, thousands of studies that have documented the changes introduced into crops, but specifically into wheat. So this is no longer open to question or debate. Wheat is different. This seem familiar to you? I think you'll understand the tactics being used if those of you my age will remember the tactics used by the tobacco industry. No, Congressman, we never added nicotine to our cigarettes, and we have no information that links smoking with lung cancer or heart disease. Of course, in the discovery process, remember that? In the lawsuit waged against big tobacco, it all came out in the process of discovery. They knew it for years. They were adding nicotine, they knew all about lung cancer and heart disease, and they knew it 20 years earlier, okay? Same kind of tactics being used. It's like there's a script they're following. So, if you're my age, you remember, in the 50s and 60s, people used to worry about being too skinny. When's the last time you heard that? Now we have, right? So we're told that, well, it's because Americans are the most gluttonous, lazy population on Earth. They're the most gluttonous, lazy population that has ever walked the Earth, and that's why we have the worst epidemic of diabetes and obesity. You buy it? No. I don't buy it. Great, I don't buy it. Yeah, there's that lazy 14-year-old who plays Xbox all day and watches TV, but that's not, and nobody here fits that bill, right? We're talking about adults responsible who try to exercise. They may not be perfect, but they try. They try to cut their fat, eat lots of healthy whole grains, but can't understand why they have all these health problems, joint pain, asthma, migraine, headaches, high blood sugar, high cholesterol, right? All those kinds of things. So I think those of us here willing to listen reject this notion that either we have to accept the status quo or it's our damn fault. So what is in this thing? What is in this thing being sold to us called wheat that might be different, that would at least allow us to question what the heck is going on? Well, to understand, you and I have to go back a long ways. We have to go back about 10,000 years. 10,000 years is a very, very interesting time in human history. So the last glaciers, the large glaciers of the last ice age had receded just about 3,000 years earlier, and temperature was rising. And humans then were scavengers, hunters, and gatherers. We ate what was instinctively regarded as food. So if you were hungry, a depth of hunger, an intensity of hunger you never felt before, what would you eat? Meat, organs, brains, heart, kidney, liver, right? Mushrooms, edible parts of plants, nuts, seeds, right? Fruit. We eat things we instinctively regard as food. Well, Climate change occurred back then for natural reasons, no coal burning, etc. So it's getting warmer. Humans are hungry. We need to eat. We watch the aurochs, the wild cows, the ibex, the wild goats, eating this grass. And we say, hey, can we eat that too? So we try. What happens when you eat grass? Well, you poop it out whole because you can't digest it, or you get very sick, you throw up, you got diarrhea, right? So we figured out the only way to eat this grass was if we threw away the roots, we threw away the shaft, we threw away the leaves, we could only eat the seed. Only if we remove the husk, pulverize it, and heat it. It's the only, somehow, clever humans 10,000 years ago figured out that the only edible part of this grass was the seed. So this happened in the Fertile Crescent. And the grass they were looking at, the grass in question, was einkorn wheat, the ancestor of our modern wheat. So that's a picture of modern einkorn. It's the modern version of this grass that grew wild in the Fertile Crescent. Now, at the same time, concurrently, the same kind of thing happened in Central America, now Mexico. We tried to eat teosinte. Teosinte is the forerunner of maize or corn. Do you see a cob? No, it's a grass. Same thing happened in sub-Saharan Africa. This is millet, but millet, sorghum were grasses consumed by humans. And just like einkorn wheat, we tried to eat the plant, got sick, till we figured out we could only eat the seed after we removed the husk, pulverize it, heat it, then we could eat it. What are these things? These are grasses. These are grasses. Grasses are very successful. Even today, with coast-to-coast asphalt and big cities, we still have 20% of the earth covered by grass. So we're told to eat the seeds of grass. Okay? Who can eat grass? Now, why can this modern version of an auroch? That's what this is. This cow is the descendant of aurochs, wild aurochs. How come they can eat grass and we can't? What's a cow got that you don't? That's right. So I'm impressed you know that. So they don't have, if a cow could show you its teeth, they don't have incisors or canines. They have a dental pad. They have a protruding upper bone. It allows them to grab grass and pulverize it. They swallow it. Well, they also have continually growing teeth. Your teeth crop up twice in life, right? When you're born and then early on and then later on, maybe 10 years old, that's your last chance at having teeth. Well, cows and other ruminants continually grow teeth because when they eat grass, there's something called phytoliths, sand-like particles in grass that erode their teeth. So they have to continually grow their teeth. They, as many of you pointed out, ruminants have 4-compartment stomachs. One of the compartments has a grinding function to help break down that grass. They regurgitate it back up to chew their cud, right? They have unique microorganisms in their stomachs to help break down the cellulose, the wood. That's what's in grass. You have a very boring, straight colon. It makes a couple of turns, but that's about it. A ruminant has a spiral colon, okay? And once again, like the stomach, houses unique microorganisms to help break down the components of grass. My point, if they're going to eat grass, it takes a very, very specific collection of evolutionary adaptations to eat those grasses, okay? None of which you have. Are there any ruminants in this audience? So, back to wheat. So what was that thing that we first consumed 10,000 years ago? That was wild einkorn wheat, a 14-chromosome plant. Well, plants have this peculiar capacity. So when you have children, you contribute 46 chromosomes to your offspring, right? Your mate contributes 46 chromosomes. How many chromosomes does your offspring have? 92? 46. So that's how mammals work. Plants don't play by those rules. They have a unique capacity called polyploidy. They can combine their genes, their genomes, okay? So einkorn For unclear reasons, on its own, this was not due to humans, einkorn mated with a grass, another grass. Einkorn is a grass. Einkorn wheat was a grass. It mated with another wild grass. That gave us emmer wheat, a 28 chromosome plant. Emmer wheat is the wheat of the Bible. So whenever there's mention of bread, wheat, etc. in the Bible or other religious documents from that age, it was emmer wheat, a 28 chromosome product of the crossing, natural crossing of einkorn with a wild grass. This happened yet again. Emmer, once again, just happened, no one did this, mated with another grass, which contributed in turn its 14 chromosomes, and that's the forerunner of what we now have, spelt and what's called triticum species. So this is what precedes all modern wheat. Well, so we go from 14 to 28 to 42. Does it make that much of a difference? Well, how much of a difference does one chromosome or two chromosomes make? Well, that's a chimpanzee. So that young chimp has 48 chromosomes, has an overlapping genetic code with humans. Estimates vary between 92 to 99%, but a lot. They're very, very closely genetically related. If we match up the chromosomes in the genetic sequence, you'll see that they're almost identical, with a few occasional changes. But can you tell the difference? I think most of us could, right? So I point this all out because a lot of people will say this. They'll say, well, I've got to eat wheat because it's in the Bible, or because it was part of the human experience forever, or some other reason like that. So I tell you this because to paint the picture that it was not part of the human experience forever, and the wheat of the Bible and the wheat of that period, that era, was nothing like what we have today. So let's go back to that moment when humans first incorporated wild einkorn wheat. What happened to those humans? And simultaneously, what happened to those humans who said, look at that teosinte or maize plant, let's eat that. Or the sorghum and millet in sub-Saharan Africa, let's have a try at that. What happened to those humans? You know what impresses me? If you talk to any anthropologists, they say, oh, we've known this for 30, 40 years. Human health deteriorated dramatically. So they'll tell you that when before the incorporation of grains into the human diet, tooth decay was almost unknown. So we're talking about 10,000, 100,000, a million years ago plus. So were there dentists? Of course not. Orthodontists? Surely. No. How about dental floss, fluoridated water, toothpaste, toothbrushes? No oral hygiene, no tooth decay. Isn't that something? So the anthropologists recover these remains of humans, and teeth are the best preserved of any component of dead bodies, and they find teeth like that. This is a 100,000-year-old skull from the Fertile Crescent of an anatomically modern human. Some people call it Cro-Magnon, but this is from the Fertile Crescent. And notice the teeth are all intact. Now, we don't know how old this person was, but it's clearly an adult, but a fully intact mouth of teeth. Okay? So what happens when grains became incorporated? Crude ancient grains. We saw an explosion in tooth decay. Depending on what time, what part of the world we're talking about 16 to 50% of all teeth. 16 to 50% of all teeth showing decay, loss, abscess, evidence for infection. Okay? We saw a shrinkage of the maxillary bone. We saw a shrinkage of the mandible. We saw evidence for iron deficiency in the skull. That's called porotic hyperostosis. And at least initially, men shrunk 5 inches, women shrunk 3 inches. In other words, the anthropologists would tell us, and they've known this, that, oh sure, when humans consumed ancient grains, we survived another day, week, another month, but paid a very substantial health price to do so. Okay, so let's fast forward now to mid-20th century. We've got smart agricultural scientists asking questions like, how do we increase the yield of these grasses? Okay, because we want to feed the world. We want to feed the hungry world. We have people starving in Ethiopia and Bangladesh. How do we feed those people? We could teach them better irrigation techniques. We could nitrate fertilize crops, or we could fuss with the genetics of plants and try to increase yield. So here's 3 agricultural scientists working in east of Mexico City in the 1960s. On the right is Dr. Norman Borlaug. Now these are 3 grown men, of course. How tall is the wheat? Shoulder high, right? That's what most of us remember is wheat, a shoulder high plant, amber waves of grain and all that business. So these guys multiply hybridized wheat with different strains. They'd import a strain from Japan, from Russia, from France, and cross them. They'd cross wheat with other grasses. Wheat's a grass, right? So they'd cross it with other grasses. They would repetitively hybridize to try to select out specific characteristics. Well, over many, many years, many thousands of experiments, this is what he got. This is Dr. Borlaug now with his semi-dwarf strain of wheat. Now, it's hard to tell from the way he's holding it, but can you tell how thick the stalk is, how short it is, how large the seeds are, and how long the seed head is? So it's a very different plant. Dr. Borlaug won the Nobel Peace Prize, 1970. This is actually the cover of Life magazine from 1970, where he was hailed as a hero because when the high-yield semi-dwarf strain of wheat was introduced into the third world, within 1 year, famine was turned to surplus. We still have pictures where there are mountains of wheat seed in poor areas because there was so much no one wanted it. So he was hailed as a hero because he helped solve world hunger. Now, it didn't stop there. So Dr. Borlaug's semi-dwarf wheat was created by all those fairly extensive hybridization, grass mating experiments. We have efforts like this. So, the wheat industry is very good at saying things like, wheat has not been genetically modified. You know what genetic modification is? It's use of gene splicing technology to insert or delete a gene. And that's right. Wheat has not been genetically modified in the terminology of geneticists. No gene splicing or genetic engineering was used to create modern wheat. What they didn't tell you was that the methods used that were crude, imprecise, and uncontrollable were, in many instances, worse than genetic modification. They didn't tell you that part, did they? So here's an example of something called clearfield wheat. Clearfield wheat is resistant to the herbicide imizamox. You've heard of glyphosate-resistant corn, Roundup Ready corn. So you can spray your cornfield with Roundup or glyphosate, and it kills the weeds, doesn't kill the corn. Well, there's a counterpart in wheat called clearfield wheat. You can spray your herbicide, imizamox, or beyond, all over your field. It kills the weeds, doesn't kill the wheat. Well, how'd they get that wheat to be resistant to an herbicide if they didn't use genetic modification? Well, they used a technique called chemical mutagenesis, okay? The purposeful induction of mutations. So they exposed the wheat seed or embryo to a compound called sodium azide and induced purposeful mutations. Let's talk about sodium azide. Sodium azide is a compound used in several industrial processes. It's very dangerous. There have been several instances of accidental human ingestion. The poison control people say, if you witness an accidental ingestion of sodium azide and the person dies, which happens, do not offer the victim CPR, because if you do, you're going to die. And if the victim vomits, don't throw the vomit in the sink, because it may explode. And that has actually happened in real life. So this is the compound they use to induce mutations in wheat. Now, the sodium azide is not in the wheat, but it's a toxic compound used to induce mutations. If you were an evil scientist and you wanted to do this to a baboon, maybe a baboon embryo in utero in a mother, baboon mom, and you exposed it to chemicals, X-ray, gamma rays like the Hulk, ultraviolet radiation, whatever, some toxic, can you control those mutations you get? Of course not. You're going to get all kinds of weird effects. Maybe some are the kinds you want, like maybe bigger or smarter or hairier, but you're going to get a whole bunch you don't want too. So this is what they've been doing. Now, surely they assessed it for the full range of mutations to ensure this is safe for human consumption. No. Looks like wheat, smells like wheat, must be wheat, and is resistant to the herbicide. That's good enough. Okay, so what is in this thing we're sold today called wheat? Is there really are there changes here really of substance? Does this all make any difference at all? If there's one thing to know, if there's one thing to remember about tonight's talk, it's that there's something in wheat called gliadin. We're going to talk about how gluten ain't the issue here. So we have this converging movement of the gluten-free. This ain't about a gluten-free. This is about all the components of modern wheat that have no business being in your diet. So the most important one to know about is the gliadin protein of wheat. To understand gliadin, we have to go back to how this all came to attention in New Guinea. So New Guinea, mid-20th century, was still a Stone Age culture. These people used stone tools, hatchets, knives. They lived off the land and were unexposed to Western culture. Well, Western culture was just coming in. And one of the observers was a physician. His name is F. Curtis Dohan from Philadelphia. And they were working with a population of 6,500 Highland natives. And they were unexposed to Western culture. And he documented one inhabitant among 6,500 in his Highland New Guinean culture with paranoid schizophrenia. Okay, so very, very uncommon, 1 out of 6,500. At the same time, he watched the influx of Western food, corn, beer, breads, goodies, candy, trading, giving, right? And he watched the incidence of paranoid schizophrenia, a very scary condition, go up 65-fold. So within a matter of months to a year or two, he watched the incidence of paranoid schizophrenia go up. So he comes back to the States and is bothered, fascinated by this crazy thing that happened in the field in New Guinea. And he's working at the VA hospital in Philadelphia, and he says to his colleagues, well, how about we test this notion here in our population in this psychiatric VA hospital in Philadelphia. So if you remember, if you're old like me, you may remember that in those days we had open wards in the hospital. You don't have a nice private room or semi-private room back then. You have large wards. So now this is a psychiatric hospital. It was closed, locked wards so that their coming and going of patients could be controlled, the medications could be controlled, and the diet could be controlled. So these doctors at the VA hospital took all the wheat out of the diet of about 40 people with paranoid schizophrenia. And over 4 weeks, watched them improve markedly. Less paranoid, less hearing voices, auditory hallucinations, better to socially engage. They added it back without telling them. They got worse over 4 weeks. They took it away again. They got better over 4 weeks. They added it back. They got worse. Published this data. A UK group says, what the heck? Come on. Let's try to corroborate this. They tried the same thing. Saw the same thing. In schizophrenic patients, they got better, they got worse, they got better, they got on again, off again. They weren't cured, they were just much better. So this led to research at our own National Institutes of Health, specifically National Institutes of Mental Health. The biochemists there asked, well, what the heck is in wheat that allows schizophrenic people to get worse? And so they took the gliadin protein of wheat and found that gliadin is digested to small polypeptides, small proteins that bind to the opiate receptors of the human brain. Now, you all know what opiates are, right? Heroin, morphine, OxyContin. So what happens when I give somebody an opiate? Well, it depends on what combination of opiate receptors are bound, because there are many opiate receptors that have varied effects. Some cause pain relief, some have antidepressant effects, some cause euphoria, some cause dysphoria, unhappiness. So the combination of opiate receptors determine what effect you have from a specific opiate. Well, that's one of the opiates in wheat. This is called the A5 pentapeptide. It's one of the 6 or so opiates in wheat. But the opiates in wheat don't give us euphoria. They don't provide pain relief like pain in your knee. They only stimulate appetite. So people who are exposed to the gliadin-derived opiates consume on average 400 more calories per day 365 days per year. Now, this gliadin protein, these gliadin-derived opiates, have a whole bunch of other interesting effects. In kids with ADHD and autistic spectrum disorder, it causes behavioral outbursts and difficulty with attention span. In people with everyday people, it causes mental fog. In people with a tendency towards binge eating or bulimia, it causes intrusive food obsessions. In people with a tendency towards depression, it causes depression. People with schizophrenia, it causes paranoia and auditory hallucinations. People with bipolar illness, it triggers the mania. So the gliadin-derived opiates have different effects depending on your unique susceptibility. But all of us get appetite stimulation, okay? Now, interesting work from Dr. Alessio Fasano, University of Maryland, now at Harvard. He spent 20 years trying to understand what gliadin did. The same protein, gliadin, does your intestinal tract. So you may not know this, but your intestinal tract is smart. You eat something, and your intestines decide, okay, should that get through into the bloodstream, or should it stay in the intestinal tract, right? Because everything that goes in, what if you're a 2-year-old? Everything goes in here, right? Your body has to decide what's appropriate for absorption and what's not. So it has that wonderful discriminatory capacity, unless gliadin is in the vicinity. Gliadin has the unique capacity to unlock the normal barriers in your intestinal tract. This is well sorted out. So there are something called tight junctions in the intestinal cells, enterocytes, and gliadin physically opens up the tight junctions and allows the passage of foreign substances into your bloodstream. Well sorted out. We're going to have a blood test for this any time now. A test for a protein called zonulin. Zonulin is one of the proteins that increases with this effect. This is probably why, this is the suspected reason why people who consume wheat, and thereby the gliadin protein, have more autoimmune diseases. And this, by the way, has nothing to do with celiac disease, has nothing to do with gluten sensitivity. Who does this apply to? Everybody. So what conditions of autoimmune inflammation could the gliadin protein of wheat lead to? Oh, here's a brief list. Autoimmune hepatitis, autoimmune retinopathy, autoimmune thyroid disease, Hashimoto's, eosinophilic esophagitis, psoriasis, reflex sympathetic dystrophy, which is loss of bladder control and bowel control, transverse myelitis, where you can't walk or feel anything in your legs. Type 1 diabetes is a disease largely of consumption of wheat in genetically susceptible people. In other words, it ain't a small list. And this has nothing to do with celiac disease, has nothing to do with gluten sensitivity. This is the consequence of the gliadin protein that causes abnormal intestinal permeability, something that applies to each and every one of us here. Let's talk about blood sugar. So, we got to pay attention to what foods raise blood sugar, right? We're living in the world's worst epidemic of diabetes, the world's worst epidemic. 1 in 3 Americans diabetic, predicted to be 1 in 2 in coming years. Another 1 in 3 pre-diabetic, right? So we're talking about an incredibly common condition. It means that your children are going to be diabetic. It means your grandchildren are guaranteed to be diabetic if we allow this to continue. So this is a table from the very first study in 1981 from Dr. David Jenkins' laboratory at the University of Toronto. He was the great-granddaddy of the whole notion of glycemic index, how high blood sugar goes in the 90 minutes after you consume different foods. So he just wanted to know, how do foods compare in their potential for raising blood sugar? So sucrose, on the right, 59. Blood sugar goes high after sucrose. That's no surprise, right? It's table sugar. How high does blood sugar go after whole wheat? 70. Oh. Goes much higher than even sucrose. Now, I'm shocked by this. This is the 1981 study, but it's been corroborated many times, many thousands of studies. So wheat raises blood sugar higher than table sugar, okay? So this is just one study I picked out of the blue. What happens to blood sugar after we eat wheat? Blood sugar goes sky high. And by the way, all these studies you read, most of them tend to be skinny undergraduate students. They're not, the 298-pound sedentary truck driver who overeats and has sleep apnea. So his blood sugar is much worse. So these slender kids, college kids with BMIs, body mass index is about 21, active, they have high blood sugars after they eat wheat. They also have very high insulin levels. Okay? These are skinny people. These aren't big fat diabetic. These are skinny people. High blood sugar, high blood insulin. Well, what happens when you have high blood sugar? You get high blood insulin. That situation creates resistance. Nobody knows quite exactly why. There's some sort of inflammatory pathway triggered that causes resistance to insulin, so you don't respond to the insulin, which allows blood sugar to go up, which prompts more insulin, which prompts more insulin resistance, and you get this vicious cycle that goes round and round and round. It gets worse and worse and worse. So we have this, if we consume these foods that raise blood sugar, we get high blood insulin, we get resistance to insulin, and that's how you get diabetes. Now, it doesn't end there. High blood sugar also causes changes in proteins in your body. So if I have 2 slices of whole wheat bread with my low-fat turkey breast, my blood sugar goes to 170, say. It's very typical. Though that high blood glucose modifies the proteins in your body, and it modifies them irreversibly. You can't undo it. So what does it do to the proteins in the lenses of your eyes? They crystallize, and you get opacities, cataracts. What happens to the proteins in the cartilage of your hips and knees? They get brittle. They start to decay, and you get arthritis. How about your arteries? Stiff arteries, okay? In other words, glycation is a fundamental process in aging. It just goes a lot faster when you have high blood sugar. So if we're told to eat plenty of healthy whole grains, we have high blood sugar for breakfast, high blood sugar for snack, high blood sugar for lunch, high blood sugar for snack, high blood sugar for dinner, what happens? You glycate much more quickly than other people. You get all these consequences, irreversible consequences of glycation. So you get insulin resistant. What does that do? It shows up on the surface. You call it a love handle, right? But it's really the surface expression of what's deep inside, deep visceral fat. This inflammatory fat that kind of looks like pus. When you biopsy, it's full of white blood cells that are inflammatory, and this is how you get inflamed. You eat foods that trigger insulin and start that vicious cycle of visceral fat growth. And that's why I call it a wheat belly. How about lectins? Getting bored yet? So there's something called lectins in wheat. So clever humans have bodies that protect them from bacteria and viruses. So if your body's invaded, let's say by a cold virus or some bacteria, what does your body do? It's got antibodies, it's got T lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, it's got it's got a whole range of immune functions to protect it, right? Plants don't have that. They don't have any of that stuff. They have a collection of proteins called lectins. Okay, these are protective for the plant, because plants have enemies too. They have molds and fungi and insects. So when they're invaded, they have lectins that are supposed to kill off the insect or mold or whatever. Now, some lectins are very benign. Spinach has a lectin. It's very benign. Anyone hear of a ricin? Used in terrorist attacks. That's a lectin. That's the lectin of the castor bean. And so that's why Homeland Security goes berserk if they see somebody ordering a ton of castor beans, because they know they might be making ricin, okay? So highly toxic lectin. Wheat germ agglutinin is the lectin of wheat. It's not as benign as the lectin of spinach, and it ain't as bad as the lectin in castor bean. It's somewhere in between, okay? So the lectin of wheat is a 4-part molecule. It is not digestible by humans. So, if I take stomach acid, put my finger in a beaker of stomach acid, my finger dissolves in a few minutes. That's how acidic the gastric juice is. If I put wheat germ agglutinin in there, it comes out whole. So it cannot be broken down by the human body. And so this thing gets into your body and does funny things. What if I purify wheat germ agglutinin? So most concentrated in wheat germ, that thing a lot of us thought was healthy. I used to eat it. What if I give a milligram, a little teensy-weensy milligram to a rat, a laboratory rat? Its intestinal tract is destroyed, okay? It looks just like celiac disease. It's not celiac disease because there's no autoimmune process triggered, but it destroys its intestinal tract. And you lose those little fingers in your intestinal tract. You get diarrhea and cramps and malabsorption, all that kind of stuff. So what does the average American get in the way of wheat germ agglutinin if you eat a diet rich in healthy whole grains? 10 to 20 milligrams. So a lot of the data is just coming out recently. When you take wheat germ agglutinin, it does damage to your gastrointestinal tract. You may experience as acid reflux. You may experience as bowel urgency. That feeling, I gotta know where all the bathrooms are because you never know, could come anytime. If you have tendency towards ulcerative colitis or Crohn's, it's much worse. It also gets through into your bloodstream. We're having emerging data now telling us that wheat germ agglutinin is highly inflammatory. And it also blocks leptin. Leptin is the hormone of satiety. It's that thing that tells you when you're eating, you can stop now, it's turned off by wheat germ agglutinin. So we're starting to see all the peculiar effects of this lectin protein of wheat germ agglutinin. There are new allergens. So anybody who knows something about allergy will tell you, all you gotta do is change 1 or 2 amino acids in a protein, and you can go from benign to anaphylaxis, allergy, or whatever. So all those changes introduced by well-intended people, like Dr. Borlaug and those scientists who changed the protein structures, this is specifically proteins, in wheat, did so, but never asked, are these changes we're making, is it still suitable for human consumption? Those questions are never asked by agribusiness nor by geneticists. So they introduce all these unique changes in the protein structures of wheat, and we have an explosion of asthma and allergies, particularly in kids. So these are from the unique proteins created in wheat. They go by some odd names like alpha amylase inhibitors, thyroreductases, serpins, omega gliadins. In other words, but the science has been worked out to a great degree. There are unique proteins in wheat largely responsible for peculiar allergic effects. Okay, so armed with this great insight, the science that there's something wrong with this thing called modern high-yield semi-dwarf wheat, what does our USDA tell us? Do they say, you know, we're unclear whether it's okay for Americans to eat wheat. Maybe have a little bit, but be alert to problems. Did they say that? No. Of course not, right? They say, eat as much as you can. So, of course, that's the food pyramid, food plate. So even in the food plate, grains remain the largest part of your diet. They tell us that 6 to 11 servings per day, 60% of your calories should come from grains. And by grains, of course, what are we talking about? We're talking about wheat, aren't we? Anybody here have millet cereal for breakfast? Did you have bulgur? Did you have buckwheat? We're talking about wheat for the most part. People hear grains, they hear wheat. So we've got gliadin-derived opiate-like compounds. Some people call them exorphins. We've got abnormal intestinal permeability from the gliadin protein. We've got amylopectin A. That's the thing that raises blood sugar higher than table sugar. We've got wheat germ agglutinin, the lectin of wheat. We've got alpha amylase inhibitors. We've got we haven't even talked about omega gliadins or glutenins. So we've got this whole collection of things in modern wheat that have all these peculiar effects in humans. What does it do to us? Well, in the gastrointestinal tract, it causes acid reflux, bowel urgency, worsening of ulcerative colitis, Crohn's disease. In the brain, it causes those effects, depending on your susceptibility, like mind fog, behavioral outbursts, and difficult attention span in kids with ADHD and autism. It causes paranoia in people with schizophrenia. It causes depression, people prone to depression. It causes the high of bipolar illness. It causes temporal lobe calcification and seizures in teenagers. Mayo Clinic just published its series a couple of years ago, Dementia from Wheat, called gluten encephalopathy, fatal in 2 years from the onset of memory deterioration to death is 2 years. At autopsy, antibodies to wheat proteins recovered in the brain tissue. How about airways? Asthma, sinus congestion. How about joints? Most characteristic is pain in the fingers and wrists, less commonly elbows and shoulders. Even large joints like hips and knees can be much worsened. You might have arthritis, but it hurts a lot worse in the presence of the inflammatory properties of wheat. In other words, there's not an organ not affected by the consumption of modern skin, very common. Like in some of those success stories. Psoriasis, very common. Seborrhea, if you see this rash here, the red rash, that's wheat, almost always. Okay? But any rash you find, always think wheat. Not to say all rashes are caused by wheat, but it's such a common culprit, always. And is it expensive to remove wheat? Does it involve a procedure? or a drug or side effects? No, it's a shift in diet, right? It's a no-cost, virtually no effort thing to try. Now, I may go out on a limb here. I'm going to argue that the effects of consumption of modern wheat are so far-reaching, so profound, that I think what we've done is we've created a healthcare system that is designed to treat the consequences of consumption of modern wheat. Okay. Now, you say, oh, come on. What about a car accident? So I'm not talking about a catastrophic or accidents. Chronic conditions, hypertension, diabetes, heart disease, dementia, rashes, arthritis, all those chronic conditions that we know we can look all around us in our neighborhoods. We know we have all these people taking drugs for these chronic conditions. These are, to a great degree, not entirely, to a great degree, caused by the consumption of modern semi-dwarf wheat. Now, let's be clear on this. This is not gluten-free. So you now know that there are many things. We only covered some of them. But there are many things in modern wheat that present problems for humans. Gluten's one of them, okay? But if we focus on gluten, which is important, by the way, to people with celiac disease, for instance, but if we focus only on gluten, if we think that wheat is only a vehicle for gluten, it makes us say stupid things. Like, eat gluten-free foods, okay? Don't eat gluten-free. No human should eat wheat. No human should eat gluten-free foods, because the gluten-free foods, as conceived by the food industry, are made with cornstarch, rice starch, tapioca starch, and potato starch, okay? So very few foods raise blood sugar higher than wheat, higher than whole wheat, except cornstarch, rice starch, tapioca starch, potato starch. Okay? So we're not going to trade a problem for another problem. So what happens with those high blood sugars from 2 slices of multi-grain gluten-free bread? What happens? High blood sugar, visceral fat grows, hypertension, heart disease, dementia, cancer, right? The whole thing. Okay. So if you want to set your course for a wheat-free life, how do you do it? Wait, let's go to the grocery store. You say, okay, I got it. I'm going to avoid the obvious things. I'm going to avoid the bread aisle. Okay, I got that. I'm going to avoid the buns and the breakfast cereals and the pancake mix. Okay, I got that. That's easy, right? Then you say, now, wait a minute. I look in the back of Twizzlers. It's the second ingredient. Uh-oh, it's in canned soup. It's in taco seasoning. It's in instant soup mixes. It's in salad dressings. It's in all frozen dinners. It's in everything. Now, by the way, why is that? That wasn't true in 1960. Why is it true in 2013? Why, if you go up and down the aisles in the supermarket, you can say, I don't get it. I can't find anything that doesn't have wheat, any processed food doesn't have. Why is that? Yeah, I think it's there to stimulate your appetite. I think smart food science, these aren't stupid people. You know, if you're working for an $80 billion company, you got some smart people working for you who watch people consume foods, and somewhere in the 80s they must have noticed that you feed this test food to somebody and they can't stop eating. They had their appetite. So I think smart people figured it out and said, hey, I think there's something different about this. You know, after all, processed foods are made of cornstarch, high fructose corn syrup, sugar, and wheat. That's it, food coloring. And so I think smart people figured it out. But rather than warn us, there's something wrong with this modern wheat, stimulate your appetite terribly, they said, keep it quiet. Let's put it in everything. So you're going to find that you've got to avoid processed foods, because they more often than not, with rare exceptions, all have wheat or other bad things. So to do this, we eat no gluten-free. Okay? Gluten-free needs to be taken. People say, oh, that Davis guy, he loves the gluten. No. We want health, right? We don't want people telling us nonsense to make money. We just want health. So we cannot find health in gluten-free junk carbohydrates. We eat vegetables. You knew that. Eat nuts. And for God's sake, don't be afraid of fat, right? When you have meat, if you eat meat, eat the fat. Eat the liver. Eat the heart. Don't throw that stuff away. If you have poultry, eat the dark meat, eat the skin, boil the bones for soup or stock. When it cools, don't skim off that gelatin or fat. Save it. It's good for you. Grandma did. Lots of oils. If you eat dairy, there's nothing wrong with the fat in dairy. There are some issues with dairy, but it has nothing to do with the fat, okay? So if you're gonna have dairy, have cream. Have half and half. Have whole milk, okay? There's nothing wrong with the fat. There are other problems with dairy. They're in the proteins. So does this mean you're gonna have to live on cardboard and lettuce? You can have all kinds of good stuff. You will return to real single ingredient foods. Foods you know are safe, right? An avocado, that's likely safe. Extra virgin olive oil, that's likely safe. A pork chop, let's put aside the farm factories and so on, likely safe, right? Vegetable, safe, right? But, you know, I had to learn this lesson myself. People say, well, that's all well and fine, but you know what? This is a real world. I got kids. I got grandkids. I've got holidays. I've got entertaining to do. What do I do? Well, so among the things I do is I show you how to make pizza, cookies, muffins, cheesecake, and you can make very good recreations if that's your interest. You can live on vegetables and nuts and meats if you want, but if you're gonna have a party on Friday and you wanna serve pizza, you can do that. You do have to make it yourself, and that's what I show you how to do. So, just a quick word before we close about, you know, when you do this. So if I take this incredibly disruptive thing in your diet out, will you recover immediately? No. So first of all, know that about 40% of people will go through a withdrawal process. If I stop taking the opiate of wheat, the gliadin-derived opiates, I'm going to go through an opiate withdrawal. And that's usually 3 to 5 days of fatigue, depression, headache, and nausea. It can be very unpleasant, okay? Everyone survives. Hydrate, try to do it when you're not gonna be stressed at work or something like that. So go through it and you think you can tolerate it. It usually does not last more than 5 days. How can you smooth this process? Can you avoid it? No. Just as an alcoholic cannot avoid going through alcohol withdrawal, someone who's been taking the opiates of wheat cannot avoid the withdrawal of the gliadin proteins, okay? So you just have to bite the bullet and endure it. Things you can do to smooth the process. Probiotics. When you remove this thing that messes up bowel flora, it doesn't recover right away. So people will say, you know what, I'm feeling a little better now. It's been 5 days, but my acid reflux is 80% gone, but I'm still kind of bloated and gassy and constipated. Do I need more fiber? No, it's this disruption of your bowel flora, okay? And you will recover because we are exposed to bacteria, right? But that's going to take months. So you can accelerate the process by taking a high-potency probiotic, like 50 billion CFUs. That includes usually lactobacillus and bifidobacterium. These are widely available. You do that only for a few weeks. If bowel health is otherwise normal, you should not have to take it all the time. You should only have to take it for a few weeks, recover, and you should be able to repopulate your bowels with healthy flora. That's how it's supposed to work. Vitamin D. If there's one thing you learned tonight is wheat ain't good for you. Number 2, vitamin D has to be fixed, even in a Florida environment. So how many of you run naked in the tropical sun? Oh, okay. So lots of surface area. So most of us are unwilling to run naked in the tropical sun, and most of us are over age 40. When over age 40, you lose the capacity to activate D in the skin. So after wheat elimination, the most powerful thing I've ever seen in health is get your vitamin D up. I aim for 60 to 70 nanograms per milliliter. It's a blood test. Usually takes about 6,000 units per day in a gel cap form, in an oil-based gel cap form, not a tablet or powder form. Magnesium. All those years of consuming wheat have impaired your magnesium absorption. It screws up your blood sugar, blood pressure, gives you cramps in the fingers and calves. Okay, it makes your blood pressure higher. The best form for absorption is the malate form, at least the common form. Most other forms are great laxatives. Unless you do laxative, you just want the malate for absorption. Most of us should not be afraid of salt. So we lose the wheat. We lose the gliadin, the gluten that causes salt and water retention. You know, people go wheat-free and they say, hey, wow, I lost 8 pounds the first week. Well, 4 of those pounds are water. And people say, you just lost water. Well, why'd you lose water? Because you lost the salt and water retaining capacity of the gliadin protein. So you can get dehydrated. So hydrate and consider some salt in your diet. And then lastly, iodine. You people here in Florida aren't as prone to this where I live in the Midwest, but we're actually seeing a return of goiters enlarged thyroid glands. So those of you in your 60s and 70s, remember those days, right? The days of goiters, well, they went away with iodized salt, and we were actually told by the FDA, use more salt, use more salt. Keep your, this was actually on the label of the Morton's iodized salt. Use more iodized salt, keep your family goiter-free. So people listened. Goiters went away. It was a very effective public health campaign. Overuse of salt led to other problems. FDA says, hey, what the heck is it with you people using all that salt? Stop it. So people say, oh, I'm going to stop using salt, right? What happens? Goiters come back. Thyroid dysfunction comes back. So first step towards maintaining, returning thyroid health is to be sure you get iodine. Less of a problem here, but it's kind of hard to know how much iodine you're getting in your diet because you don't really know where food is sourced anymore. All the iodine in the world is in the ocean, not in the land. A little bit leaches into the land when you're coastal. But when you buy food, was it grown here? Was it grown in Kansas? You don't know. That's the problem. And so an easy way to be sure is just get an iodine supplement. And these are the first steps you take in the aftermath of removing this thing that was incredibly disruptive on your health called modern wheat.
This book,
Wheat belly.
I read it all the way through. I kicked that wheat to the curb. My life started all over new. The scale became my friend. My relationships improved. My doctor was amazed. My wheat belly is fading away.
Play that guitar, James.
Had to show you that. I got a kick out of that. Anyway, any of you who are interested in cupcakes and other ways to make this lifestyle navigable, I post recipes in the books, of course, but also on the blog. There's a Facebook page for the Wheat Belly Conversation where people share their recipes. So we now have many hundreds of thousands of people sharing recipes, pictures, stories. How do you do this? What probiotic did you take? All that kind of stuff is in the social media. Okay? All right, thank you for listening. Now, I believe we're taking a few questions. Okay.
Thank you for a splendid lecture. The new buzzword is diabesity. And back when I began my wellness practice 45, 50 years ago, the popular healthy blood sugar in America was 80. Now it's between 90 and 100. And from all your experiences, what is your favorite healthy blood sugar level fasting?
So the question is, what's a truly healthy blood sugar? It depends on your perspective. So I think one important perspective not often talked about is when does the curve for glycation really start to increase? In other words, when do you start to irreversibly modify the proteins of the body? Believe it or not, about 90. And I'm comforted by that because, it's consistent with all the things we've seen. We see that cardiovascular events increase over 90. 90 is kind of scary, right? Because we've been told for a long time 110 was okay, 115 was okay, 126 and higher is diabetes, right? So a lot of people have been told their blood sugar of 108 was okay. Well, it's less harmful, right, than 126, but it ain't perfect. So if your goal, we always have to be careful with this, if your goal is ideal health, and we look at this from the perspective of blood glucose, I would argue that, and I think the data are consistent with this, a blood glucose of 90 or less. And you'll see a lot of us following this lifestyle, by the way, have fasting glucoses in the 80s. It's very common.
Thank you very much.
Sure. Sure.
I have a very good friend whose daughter is 7 years old, and she gets headaches. And so the mother has done a lot of research and has decided that wheat is the culprit. And when this little girl comes over, I go to Publix and I buy whole grain spaghetti rather than feeding her that white flour stuff. So in a situation like that, what can we be feeding our children or our grandchildren to get them off this wheat thing. I mean, white flour is not good, wheat flour is not good, but you can't eat avocados and olive oil every day for lunch. So what do you do? Besides buy your book, which I'm going to.
Do the same thing you would do for yourself. So make it easy on yourself. Don't even have the stuff in the house. No temptation. Because remember, let's say you're wheat-free for a month. You feel good, right? Everything's starting to, your joint pain's gone, you're feeling good, mood's good, you lost 14 pounds, whatever, right? You have a re-exposure. What happens? Diarrhea, joint pain, migraine headaches, depression, appetite stimulation for about 5 days. In other words, that little indulgence, those couple of pretzels you thought were harmless, can do all kinds of things. Okay? I call it the beware the mighty breadcrumb effect.
What can you do if you're sending a child to school who eats lunch at school? What do you send them with?
Send it with what you can. In other words, send them with real food. Same rules here. Pack them real foods. Pack them, if you can, a leftover chicken, salad, real food. You know what? We can't control kids' behavior, right? They're going to go have a sleepover. They're going to have a birthday party. So the best you and I can do is educate the kids. Tell your son or daughter why you're doing this. I do this with my kids. I've got a 15-year-old, and I know when he has a sleepover at his friend's house, they're probably having pizza. But then he comes back, and he knows he had it because he feels awful for a couple of days. So let him educate himself. So we can't force them to do it, we just have to educate them. But that's another reason for the recipes. You know, if you have people reluctant in the house and you make them, say, a delicious pizza or apple streusel coffee cake, and they realize, hey, you know what, you can actually have these things on occasion. Now, some people fuss about the sweeteners. We use stevia and erythritol, things like that. But if I had to choose between sucrose or wheat, with days to weeks of health consequences versus a minor indulgence, say, with stevia, I'll take the stevia, at least once in a while.
You're concentrating on wheat, but you did say that we just need to avoid processed foods altogether. So we're talking like corn tortillas and rice pasta, quinoa pasta. These are all things that we need to avoid because of the glycation, or am I on the right track here?
I think it depends on your goals. If you have acid reflux, it almost always goes away with wheat elimination. If you have bowel urgency, it almost always goes away with wheat elimination. If you have joint pain, almost always goes away with wheat elimination.
I've experienced all that, but what about with the other grains?
So what if you, step two, you say, okay, that's great. Now I'm starting to understand that food choices have profound effects on my health. I want ideal health now. And so if you want ideal health, humans should not eat grains of any sort. Okay, so now that's not my message tonight. My message here is there's something that's been done to wheat that made a bad thing really bad. But let's go beyond that. Let's graduate to the next level. I want ideal health. Now we're going to talk about vitamin D, bowel flora, omega-3 fatty acids, magnesium, and eat no grains. So that's why I gave you the introduction of what happens to primitive humans who add millet, sorghum, maize, and teosinte. They had health problems too. So even a return to the ancient grains, we pay a health price. By the way, I hate to even tell you this, the only grain not associated with a marked deterioration in health is rice. Rice is mostly, not to say eat rice, please don't hear that. So rice in the spectrum, that's right. It's the least offensive. It doesn't mean it's not offensive. It's the least offensive. You can still be quite diabetic eating rice, you know. So just be aware of that the implications for rice, putting aside the newer implications of genetic modification of rice, a whole other issue, are blood sugar consequences.
On that note, let's thank our speaker.
Thank you.